Thank you. I will give you more options, I promise, with my question. The question is very specific. What is your answer to ethical positivism? It's very important for me to know what is the next step of the old discussion between positivism and you.
You mentioned ethical positivism.
Ethical positivism, like Waldron and another McCormick.
Tom Campbell as well.
Can you explain? I have never heard the phrase ethical. Legal positivism, I understand. But what is ethical positivism?
Well, you say in one article about Hart in January of this year that positivism recognize that they have one moral position when they choose the positivism. I don't know if the context is. Do you understand?
I apologize to you. I know what you mean. I use the term political positivism in the article I think you have in mind. And I use that term because Jeremy Waldron, in his article, I think used the term political positivism. But am I right in thinking that what you have in mind is the argument that we have good reason in political morality for asking judges not to take morality into account in their particular decisions? That's the view you have in mind.
Yes, it's important because here in Mexico, all the authority is from the legislator, not from the judge. The judge have one role different than in the common law.
Yeah. Yes.
And then here in Mexico, we need to know how it's important that the judges have this perspective, because they have behind his resolutions some kind of moral position, and we don't in the culture we don't understand that in at least in common the people. I don't know if you can explain more about this point.
Good. Okay, let me apologize again because I just didn't recognize the term, and now I do know. I'm not sure, by the way, that McCormick and Waldron are examples of this. Waldron describes it. McCormick, I think, once held this view, but he tells me that he's now given it up, that his views are much more like the ones that I defend. But that doesn't matter. There are people. One very good example is Frederick Schauer of the Harvard University. And as I said in Justice and Rose, I think that's the form of positivism that is the strongest. So it's a very good question you ask. One issue is whether political positivism is possible. That is, whether judges really can decide without using their own judgment about moral issues. Can it work? Can it be done? In the classical or analytic positivism, the theorists like Herbert Hart or maybe Kelson said, no, it can't be done, and therefore judges need discretion. because the law runs out. And then they have discretion. And in the area of discretion, they exercise their own moral judgment, political judgment, as to what law to make. Now, that view is not available to the political positivist, because the political positivist says the virtue of my position is that we don't have judges making moral decisions. So that, for me, raises the question, is it possible? A very good test of that is I'm sorry always to refer to American examples, but they're the ones I know. Some of you may be familiar with the argument about originalism in the United States Supreme Court. Those judges who say they are originalists say that they are political positivists. The moral case for their positivism is democratic theory. They say in a true democracy, judges shouldn't be making law. Therefore, we look to the intention of the lawmakers, which is a historical question, not a moral question. It doesn't work. You can't, these intentions are too ephemeral. You've got to make moral judgments to decide which intentions to pay attention to. So that's the first problem with political positivism, and I think it's an insurmountable problem. Next, however, the question is, what is the moral background or the ethical background to which they appeal? I've just given one example of that, democratic theory. In my view, that appeal to democracy is an appeal to an impoverished view of democracy. I don't think it's a defensible view of what democracy is, because it holds that democracy means majority rule. And that's not, you disagree. Why don't you? Yeah.
Yes, that is the big problem between democracy and human rights, because democracy in that point of view of majority is have one position in front of the human rights that all the people the authority have to respect the human rights of all persons. That point is very important, because if the judges have the responsibility for prevent that human right, that point is very important. I think it can.
Yes, and I agree with you, and I'm just making, you might think, too philosophical a point, that majority rule is not a good understanding of what democracy is. And my argument for that is not just verbal, I hope. Democracy is a value. We start from the idea that we're committed to democracy as something valuable. But majority rule is not just by itself valuable. There's no particular moral advantage in the view of more people. So in order to make democracy a value, we have to bring rights into the notion of what democracy is. Now, if that's right, then once again, political positivism doesn't have a sufficient background, moral background, by appealing to democracy. Because it leaves open the question, are the conditions of individual right met? And the judge who says, well, I'm just going to assume that they've been met, is not doing the proper job. So then the question becomes, is there any other moral background that would lead to operational positivism, which would lead to telling judges, you just decide what the legislature has said? Jeremy Waldron does have a view which, or at least did at one point have a view, that majority rule is fair, even if it's not the best understanding of democracy. It's what fairness requires when people disagree. I don't think that's right. I put to him this example. If you have a lot of people, standard philosopher's kind of example, if you have a lot of people in a lifeboat and one of them must be thrown overboard or the whole boat will sink, how do you decide which one? The last thing you would do is have a vote, because the unpopular one or the one with less friends will be thrown overboard. It's only under certain circumstances that majority rule is fair, and that means when rights are protected. So it's a very good question, your question, and I think it's the important issue now. It's an issue mainly in political philosophy. And I'm not persuaded by political positivism, or as you call it, ethical positivism, but it's better than analytic positivism, for which there's nothing to be said.